1960, John F. Kennedy was about to move into the White House. Elvis was in the Army, and 12,000 fans packed the new super speedway at Daytona Beach, Florida. Stock car racing was becoming a big-time sport. With 500 horses under each hood, it was like football on four wheels. The attraction was that people could watch the cars they drove every day, Fords, Chevys, and Plymouths, out on the track, going 150 miles per hour. It was on the back roads of the rural South that drivers like Junior Johnson, Buck Baker, and Buddy Schumann learned their trade, racing on the wrong side of the law.
That looks like a car.
Sure does.
We'll step on it.
For decades, they'd been hauling moonshine and trying to steer clear of government agents like Joe Carter, who'd been sent in to stop them.
I considered it a lot of fun, but it was also a lot of danger in it. Some of the kids up there knew every curve in the county and how much speed they could take it at under certain weather conditions.
Most of the drivers were teenagers. They go down a 16-foot wide road and do a complete 180 by spinning the car. If you could do that, you were a good moonshine driver.
The 1958 movie Thunder Road became a cult favorite, depicting bootlegging as a romantic, action-packed business. The truth was a lot less glamorous. Bootlegging was dangerous, but the money earned by a successful run could make the difference between eating and going hungry.
Honey, everybody was poor. Back in those days, there just wasn't any money.
That's why there were so many families that had bootleggers in their families. They were starving to death, and you were living on cornbread and beans, and I mean, that's all you could afford.
In Tim Flock's family, a backwoods still kept food on the table for a family of 9.
A couple of times, my two brothers would take me up in the North Georgia mountains to see how moonshine liquor was made. But it was a real hard job and a real hard way to make a living.
Making corn whiskey without getting caught was the first trick. Getting it to market was the next. The key to success was a car that would not attract attention.
You could put between 100 and 180 gallons on a 39 Ford when they had everything stripped out except a bucket seat.
On the outside, a bootlegger's car looked like any other, but inside were hundreds of mason jars filled with white lightning.
It's almost unbelievable how much they could put in on a car. Now, you couldn't do that in an ordinary car because it would drag the ground, but they put in, sometimes spend $1,000 just putting extra supports and airlifts and overload springs under the back.
And they'd be up like this going up in the mountains, and when they put a load of liquor on it, they'd come back down.
The most important part of a bootlegger's car was under the hood. Hopped-up engines could carry the load and then some. The federal agents, known as revenuers, were stuck with government-issue economy cars.
Give it all you can.
It wasn't much of a contest. Guys pass you up at 150 miles an hour. You can't make 80. It's kind of a hopeless situation.
A revenuer's best hope was to get his hands on a bootlegger's car.
The best car I ever drove was one we'd seized from this Willie Clay Calls. Had 2 full-barrel carburetors and a lot of hoses going back and forth across the engine, and it was the fastest thing I ever seen. And the car wouldn't run good till it got over 100 miles an hour.
Arguments broke out over who had the fastest car. On the weekends, instead of outrunning the law, bootleggers tried to outrun each other.
They cut a place out in the open field and started racing on Sundays. No grandstands, no ticket sales, and they started betting on, man, I know I got the best car. My car outrun your car. This was actually the beginning of stock car racing down south.
It wasn't long before bootleggers were joined at the track by farm boys and factory hands from all over the South. Suddenly, there was a new place to go after church on Sunday.
You got to remember the South, back in the 40s and 50s, the South was really a dull place. They were trying to eke a living out with tobacco fields and fight the boll weevils in the cotton fields. And the only place you could see any color at all was if you went down to the candy store, or if you went to a movie, or you went to a stock car race.
As a kid selling soda in the stands of the old Charlotte Speedway, Humpy Wheeler knew he was hooked.
As soon as I got out of University of South Carolina, the first thing I did was go lease a quarter-mile dirt red clay speedway, and it was a gunfight at Oak Cake Corral every Friday night.
A guy that was real hungry would do anything to win one of those races in the early years. They would take you and get beside you in a turn and wouldn't turn, and you'd have to keep going straight and knock you out of the race.
Tim Flock fought his way through the rough and tumble world of stock car racing better than most, winning 40 Grand National races.
I'd say 8 out of 10 races, there'd be some kind of fight or some kind of argument.
I used to pay the drivers off. I had a 55 Chevrolet, and I would have the cash in the front seat. I'd be sitting there, and we'd have the cash between myself and my brother. He had a long-nosed revolver sitting up there on the dashboard that everybody could see. And when the drivers would come up to the window, we'd roll the window down about that much, and if the guy was, say, get $500 for winning the race, we'd stick it out through that window. And if we didn't like what they were doing out there, we just cranked the car up and took off. And they looked at you, if you were running a racetrack back in those days, like you were just really needed to almost be in jail.
When people realized that I had married a race driver, it was a look of, you poor thing. People, I think, more or less put us in the category of carnivals.
We had a tough time in those days getting any publicity because we were kind of a black sport and we weren't sticking ball. And the sports editor, he liked golf or college football and racing. If we got 2 paragraphs, we were lucky. So we had to come up with crazy stuff, crazy ideas.
One publicity stunt was to put a woman behind the wheel. Her name was Louise Smith, 30 years old, from Greenville, South Carolina. Louise's driving had earned her a reputation with the local sheriff, but she'd never been to a racetrack in her life.
They wanted some lady to drive, and they said, well, we only got one crazy woman here that'll drive.
Well, Louise Smith had to be one of the toughest women in the world because she jumped into this thing when it was just about as rough and tough as you could get.
Louise ran her first race with only the sketchiest understanding of the rules.
I didn't even know what the checker flag meant. The man that owned the car said, if you see a red flag, stop. And I never did see no red flag. I seen all the cars go out in the infield, and I wondered where they were going, me still out there running. So they had to give me the red flag, get me off the speedway, and I was the only one out there still running.
When she went out there, the drivers did not like it. They didn't like a woman out there on the racetrack.
Oh yeah, I've been knocked out a few times. Sometime it'd get kind of ornery, but they didn't bother me too much. I got where I was pretty good. In fact, they said I was the best on the track. Just stay out of my way, that if I got close enough to bump them, you could cut them and flip. If you hit them just right, they're gone.
By the mid-60s, stock car racing had become big business, with corporate sponsors and $100,000 purses.
Which one? There they come in the lead part of the fourth turn now.
Detroit's Big Three knew the value of having their cars win at Charlotte, Daytona, or Darlington.
We went nuts. Henry Ford was an enthusiast of all kinds of racing, so we decided once I could sell him on something, I could do anything. We got as high in 1 year spending $35 million budgeted for racing. I mean, think of that in dollars 30 years ago. What that'd be today, 100 million plus. And we decided that we wanted to win every race man had ever put together, from the 24 Hours of Le Mans to the Indianapolis Speedway, to the stock car races on Sunday, to the drag races. We won everything. We used to say, race on Sunday, sell on Monday. And in the South, that was true.
Not only did fans love the look of a winner, they wanted a car that went as fast as the one at the track. Detroit was happy to feed the fever, offering high-performance cars with macho names like Eliminator, Cobra, and Barracuda. And they turned them loose on a young public that had only one question: how fast will it go?
You could order up a racing car. I want this body style, I want this engine, I want a 4-speed transmission, I want these wheels and tires. And not only could you buy it, it was under warranty. So you go out and blow it up, and then they'd have to replace all the parts that you destroyed.
They were called muscle cars, and they sold like gangbusters until insurance rates and emissions regulations killed them off.
I mean, can you imagine today being able to buy a 200-mile-an-hour car? Be unheard of. But you could.
In Pacific, Missouri, Richard Winkler rides herd on his cattle without riding a horse. He rides a bug.
I laughed. That was a funny looking little thing.
I call it a pregnant roller skate.
And the ride is...
I feel like going up and kicking it in the side. It's not a car.
The popularity of the Volkswagen Beetle was that it was an anti-car. I mean, it became popular because it was a counter car.
We thought it was no competition, but it didn't go away.
The Volkswagen Beetle was one of the most revolutionary cars of all time. It was homely, it was puny, and it embodied an idea that ran counter to everything Detroit stood for. Less is more. To drive that message home, VW launched an ad campaign that was clever and irreverent.
The Volkswagen is one of the tallest cars in the world. So there's more than enough headroom, even for the little woman.
Here is a brand new 1968 Volkswagen. How many changes can you find? You have 10 seconds. Look it over. Don't miss a thing, Gino. Every little detail may count.
Hood locks, seats, and shock absorbers. And for all these years of testing and improving the Volkswagen, we ask a mere $17.80. Never before.
You know, the Beetle advertising was genius, if there ever was genius, because it said, you know, buy me, I'm cheap. I look just like last year's model. We don't change from year to year. And to a growing number of people, this was tremendously appealing. I mean, because they were tired of what they considered to be Detroit flim-flam.
The VW's body was so tight, it would float. The engine, on the other hand, needed no water at all. It was air-cooled. The Bug never boiled over, never froze, and it could go weeks between fill-ups.
Its price was the big thing. All my friends were buying it because of its cost. And it ran forever for nothing, and it was kind of a fun thing to have.
Bugs were perfect for families buying another car for the kids, for college professors making a statement, and for anyone wanting basic transportation. The Volkswagen Beetle eventually became the best-selling car of all time, even beating out Henry Ford's Model T. In the beginning, Detroit paid little attention to the Volkswagen, but the Japanese followed their every move. In 1957, Los Angeles was host to America's first imported auto show. The two Japanese cars on display surprised everyone, Toyota's Bluebird and Datsun's Fairlady. As one person remarked, I didn't know the Japanese even made cars.
The early Japanese cars were bizarre and ugly. I mean, double ugly.
And their performance matched their looks. The Datsun Fairlady boasted an engine with a whopping 37 horsepower. Just getting the car up a hill was an ordeal. The car also had bad brakes, severe vibration, and other assorted quirks. It did get good gas mileage, but with gasoline at 30 cents a gallon, no one much cared. Nissan, who made the car, knew they'd have to fix the Datsun's most obvious shortcomings. So engineers spent weeks driving the tiny car up and down the Los Angeles freeways.
And it was finally while they were driving one and experimenting and upgrading it, when they beat a VW on a hill, that they knew they could do it. The VW was the target. And they just kept coming. The cars kept getting better, the performance was better. They learned very quickly. The learning curve was very short for them.
Nissan sold only 52 Datsuns in 1958. So they sent one of their most outspoken managers to Los Angeles with instructions to create a dealer network from scratch. By the age of 50, Yutaka Katayama had stepped on a few too many toes. He was known more as a rebel than a company man, openly criticizing what he thought were bad management decisions.
He was really sent to America, I think, largely to fail. They didn't know what else to do with him. And I thought, we're not going to be that successful in America, so send Katayama. If we fail, it's his failure.
Well, when I arrived at Los Angeles, I came to a very free country and made me feel very good.
One of the first people Katayama hired was John Parker, who would create Datsun's advertising for the next 18 years.
His English was bad, my Japanese was even worse. We sat and smoked cigarettes, drank tea, talked philosophy and about life and how we had a great opportunity.
If there was a great opportunity, Katayama was the only one who saw it. Pearl Harbor had left many Americans feeling anti-Japanese, and the Datsun product was clunky. And Katayama knew almost no one in the U.S.
Katayama got his start, literally, driving a Datsun car to a guy that's got a corner garage or maybe a used car lot and says in his very broken English, "Wouldn't you like to sell Datsun cars and trucks?" And I think about 99% of the time the guy would say, "Get out of here."
Well, I'll tell you, it was so tough. It was hard to get new dealers. It really was.
In terms of the kinds of people that these were, they were an amazing assortment. I used to wonder whether some of them had ever had a real suit, a pair of pants and a coat that matched.
The dealers loved Mr. Katayama. He was almost like a Billy Graham to them.
He'd get up there and in his broken English, he'd say, "You make money, we make money. You build bigger facility, we'll build a bigger facility. You sell more cars, we'll get more cars." And A would talk to B, and B would talk to C, and C would talk to his brother-in-law and say, "I think we ought to start a business." And that's the way the thing started to grow.
So we started on a wing and a prayer, and you know, fortunately, we had some good product coming along.
The sound move is to Datsun. Four-door, wagon, pickup, 2 Datsun sports cars, and a 4-wheel drive patrol.
By the late 60s, Datsuns featured overhead cam engines, disc brakes, and color-coordinated interiors.
Sound move to solid comfort. Rattle-free Datsun unit bodies. 4- and 5-speed all-synchro-mesh transmission.
Things were looking up. Little did they know that an event halfway around the world was about to make them an overnight success. In 1973, the unthinkable happened. Our gas pumps suddenly ran dry. The oil-producing nations of the Middle East had decided to play hardball. They wanted more money for their oil, and they weren't going to sell a drop of it until they got the price they wanted.
That's how desperate people were. I remember the long lines that we sat in, people following fuel delivery trucks down the road to see which gas station they were going to stop at.
I've been in those lines for 2.5, 3 hours and got all the way up there, and 5 cars ahead of me, they've run out of gas after being in the line for 3 hours. Talk about disheartening.
Suddenly, Americans were faced with the horrifying prospect of having our freedom taken away from us, because the car had always symbolized freedom, freedom to go when you want, as far as you want, and basically fairly cheaply. The oil crisis meant that that might not be the case anymore, and that was horrifying.
The oil crisis began showing up everywhere, even in the movies. In 1973, a group of college students got together and made a movie called Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Here's how the movie goes. There are 5 teenagers in a van, and they stop at a Gulf station because they're running low on gas.
Would you fill her up, please? I got no gas. You're out of gas? My tank's empty.
Before the movie is over, 4 of the 5 have been murdered by various members of a family of cannibals. So either they sell you gasoline,
We ought to go to that gas station and get help.
or they don't sell you gasoline, in which case they kill you and turn you into barbecue and sell the barbecue to other folks who stop for gas.
I got some good barbecue here. Why don't you fellas stick around here a while?
But I think that movie gets at the heart of a very great fear for a lot of Americans, that if we ever run out of gas, if we can't drive or can't drive as much as we'd like to, we're going to die.
This is one of our most valuable resources, a gallon of gasoline. Put it in the average car and you'll get about 13.5 miles. Put it in a Datsun 1200 and you'll get around 30 miles.
Suddenly, there was a mad stampede for small, fuel-efficient cars, and Detroit was caught off guard.
The Japanese had all these little cars, and so when the demand came so instantly, they were poised to have a field day. They had a banquet. They feasted on us. I mean, because they were there and people wanted them.
The imported car was here to stay, and Detroit was in for a bumpy ride. At Datsun, the dealers could hardly believe their good fortune.
The dealers changed as a group. You could just see the change from meeting to meeting. They got slicked up, and the wives got slicked up, and you saw more fur coats, and the evidences of improving sales became very obvious.
I have lots of millionaires in the United States. I made lots of millionaires.
These people made their own success and knew that Datsun and to a certain extent Mr. Katayama were a very, very integral part of that success.
On a hot summer night in 1971, Eddie Campos did the unthinkable. He drove his dream car to a Ford assembly plant in Pico Rivera, California, soaked it with gasoline, and set it on fire.
It was a Lincoln Continental. It was a brown car, but as pretty as a car that will ever be made. So I saved my money. When I walked into the showroom, the guy told me, maybe that's not the car you want. He says, maybe it's too much for you to pay. I said, no, this is the car I want.
First brand new car we've ever bought. It was a lot of money for us with 3 kids.
I let my wife drive it home, and on the way home, the whole ignition switch fell out of the car.
But Eddie was so mad about it.
I didn't even drive the car for an hour before it fell apart.
From then on, it was just the car from hell.
You turn the air conditioner on, the heater goes on.
You went to roll up the windows, it wouldn't go up.
Then you go back to the dealer. Well, we'll take care of it. It was just something minor, you know.
There was one time when we had gotten the car, it was brand new, and we decided to go to this restaurant.
We got out of the restaurant, you know, when you got a new car, luxury car, you park in front, you know, you're the big shot. You're the big time people, you know, you got what your neighbor don't have.
And for no apparent reason, it died on us.
Car won't start. You are out there with your hood open on your car, you know, cold at night. No way.
It was a very embarrassing thing because people would say, well, where's your car? Well, it's in the shop. Again?
The only thing that car didn't have that it should have been equipped with was a tow bar.
There was one time when it wouldn't start, and I left it on the highway and walked home.
She called me up and says, come over and get this piece of get rid of it.
He came and picked me up, and I guess somehow he got the car running, and he said he'd be home later, but he didn't come home.
I took it to the Ford Motor plant, put it right in their yard. I poured some gas on it. I threw a match on it, sat on under a tree, and watched that miserable piece of junk burn.
News of Campos and his charred Lincoln spread across the country, hitting a nerve with frustrated car owners everywhere. It wasn't long before bagloads of mail started arriving at the Campos home. Campos was not alone. Warranty reports from the early 70s showed that an awful lot of defective cars were rolling off Detroit's assembly lines.
To whom it may concern, I have a loud whistling noise when operating the heater. I took the car to my dealer and they
may
said...
concern. Last night, the back part of the driver's seat of our car broke off, and my husband almost lost control of the car.
I'm writing regarding my new Chrysler Imperial. The engine constantly smokes, and the automatic windows are broken.
A Americans were discovering their latest inalienable right, the right to own a car that wasn't a lemon. Leading the charge was an earnest young lawyer named Ralph Nader. In the mid-60s, he had single-handedly taken on General Motors, alleging they had knowingly built an unsafe car, the Chevy Corvair.
His name has become synonymous with automobile safety. Here is Ralph Nader. Welcome.
Nader's tangle with GM made him famous and helped launch the consumer movement, which began questioning the safety and reliability of all kinds of things, from children's pajamas to automobiles.
The kinds of facts that would get people to say, well, why don't we have this kind of engineering and science in our cars, on our highways?
Angry car owners had found their voice, but Detroit executives didn't seem to be listening.
There is nothing more vulnerable than entrenched success. I mean, they'd been so successful for so long. If you went to them and said, listen, you guys, you've had a great run, but you caught a great wave, and it may get harder now, they would have laughed at you.
Executives seemed to be sleepwalking into what would become the worst decade of their professional lives.
The 1970s was twilight for the gods as far as the car companies go. They were hurting already from the consumer movement. Imports were starting to cut into their business. And gasoline, which had always been plentiful, suddenly became scarce. Detroit stumbled and didn't know where to go.
Detroit is selling 8-mile per gallon hogs. 7, 8, 9 miles per gallon was the norm.
And there was fears of the price of gas going to $5 a gallon. And people panicked.
Many of my friends decided to trade in their large cars on small cars in a panic.
People were paying huge premiums to own a Japanese car. You couldn't give away a Cadillac. Sales fell apart. Dealers were going out of business.
As the 70s wore on, Detroit's problems only got worse. Labor relations were at an all-time low. Engineers were buried under a growing mountain of government regulations that dictated everything from sun visors to tailpipe emissions. And quality continued to suffer. In 1977, Detroit was forced to recall more cars than they sold.
We went for a production, and we went to get the cars out, and quality wasn't high on the list in the plants. And we hadn't designed for it, and I made the comment, I said, I guess if we're taking a beating now, we deserve it because we shipped some crap.
The auto manufacturers did their best to maintain appearances, but no one was fooled. The love affair was over, at least temporarily. For Detroit executives, the years before foreign competition, fuel shortages, and government regulations seemed like a faded dream. Never again would the American consumer faithfully buy whatever they had to offer. By the end of '79, Chrysler was on the verge of bankruptcy, and Ford wasn't far behind. In 1980, Japan replaced the U.S. as the world's largest auto-producing nation.
When you're ready to die, it has a way of focusing your mind. I mean, Jesus.
In the 1980s, Detroit finally began to fight its way back, struggling to undo years of bad habits.
It took a long time for us to learn Japan's lessons because we had to get over our pride. And you know what that means. It means that you have to accept that you've made mistakes, and that's a very, very difficult thing for management to do.
I think we learn from them. I think today American cars are the equal of Japanese cars, and they're pretty damn good. They're world class. What goes down usually comes around, and now the industry's back, and we look like heroes. My father used to say when I went to the automotive, remember, there are two kinds of cars, those that sell and those that don't sell. And if you can, make cars that sell. The rest is all, forget it. So, it's not rocket science. Tough minutes, but it's not rocket science.
America's passion for the automobile was sudden and lasting. An obsession that captured us young and held us for life.
My husband was so crazy about cars and going somewhere. His mother used to tell if he'd be crying, all she would have to do is get his bonnet out, and he shut up right away. He was born with wheels.
Fred Jones and Helen Mead grew up down the street from one another in the farm town of Oregon, Illinois. They were married in 1924. As the first generation born to the car, they would explore the entire continent in a way their parents could never have imagined.
Oh, my husband would plan and plan a trip till he knew everything about where he was going. But this one time, he wanted to go to Yellowstone Park, and I wanted to go to Bar Harbor, Maine. My mother said, well, how am I going to know where you're going if you don't tell me? And I said, well, when we get down to this second corner, if we make a right turn, we're going to Yellowstone. If we make a left turn, we're going to Bar Harbor. Well, we went to Bar Harbor, and we should have gone to Yellowstone. Whenever there was a good road, we were on it, because we were just going all the time, you know?
The car took us out of the little towns. It took us no stoplight from New York to California. The open road, great scenery. We're just a mobile nation, almost nomadic, I'm afraid, these days.
If you added up all the miles Americans now drive each year, you could go to Pluto and back 216 times. And though people claim to support public transportation, very few actually take it. Everyone now travels by car, or wishes they did.
People in a rush, people living in their cars, people banking through their cars, people going to church, people going to the movies, people going to restaurants, to all these things, doing it through their cars. A Japanese friend of mine said he was stunned when he got to America for the first time. He realized that in America, people didn't use their legs, they used their wheels.
From the beginning, there have been problems most of us don't want to think about. 2.5 million people killed since 1928. 300 million tons of exhaust a year. Scientists worry that we might be permanently damaging the Earth's protective ozone layer. We fell in love with the car because it provided escape and freedom. and then found ourselves trapped in look-alike malls, parking lots, and traffic jams. So we built new dream machines that could climb the highest mountain, conquer the desert, go wherever we wanted to go.
The fantasy in a sport utility vehicle is the open road.
It's the car that announces you're not a wuss. You're not an executive who wears suspenders, you know, and is sort of a middle management suck-up type of guy. You're a hard-driving cowboy kind of character.
Perhaps the ultimate road warrior is the Humvee, the King Kong of cars, and the hero of Desert Storm. More than 50 years after the first Jeep, we still love to put those combat cars through their paces.
I use it to get me to school, go to the store, go to work, go to the mall, anywhere. I can take it anywhere I want to go. I could take it off-road.
The statistics on how many people actually take these things off-road is very small. And yet, it is part of the wanderlust of owning one. Why do people buy the Eddie Bauer version of the Ford Explorer with its little pine tree ornaments all over the seat? It's as much of the reason why they bought muscle cars 30 years ago.
From the moment we're old enough to hold a toy car in our hands, we can imagine ourselves behind the wheel. The first thing every teenager wants is a car, and it's the last thing we ever want to give up.
I'm not much of a car person. As long as the thing starts and it stops, that's all I know about a car. But I like this little Pontiac that I had. It was I bought it in '79, and I just sold it here about 6 months ago. And I regret it, but I knew the time had come that I should stop driving.
Hazel McCourt and Helen Jones are two of Oregon, Illinois' oldest residents.
No, you're older than I am, Helen.
Oh, yeah. I remember when you were a little kid.
Oh, is it that bad?
Yeah. I'm afraid it is.
They can remember the arguments over paving these streets, and the time before they were lined with parking meters, garages, and gas stations. With over 100 years of driving experience between them, it's hard for either Helen or Hazel to imagine life without a car.
Did you go to church this morning, Hazel?
No, the friend that picked me up was sick, so I didn't go. I was all ready to go.
You should have called me.
You don't drive, do you?
How do you think I get anywhere?
Well, don't tell me, because I gave up driving, about 5 months ago, and do I ever miss my car? I could run uptown, and pay a bill, or go and pick up some pork chops or something like that, and I can't do that, and I can't get used to it.
Did you get rid of your car?
Everybody was after it.
Well, I bet they were, too. I always wondered whether my husband liked his car better than he did me. Really. The only thing is, he always changed cars. But he didn't change wives.
We can change the makes and models, but the love affair remains. It's the car that's been our constant companion through all the great adventures of our lives.
Why is the automobile so central to our civilization? And one answer may be that it really reaches back to the American psyche, to the way we define ourselves as a people, our individualism, our freedom, our love of the wide open spaces. You can go when you want to go, where you want to go. There's no question that Americans believe in the automobile and are not about to let go of it.